What happens when you finally stop fighting the life that you've been given and start taking responsibility for the road that you're on? Today on Unmasked, we're talking about addiction, recovery, intentional living, and the unexpected freedom that comes when you stop resisting reality and start owning your own story. Welcome to Unmasked, where we take off the filters and get real about faith, failure, and finding freedom. I'm your host, Wesley Farnsworth, a dad, veteran, author, and a man who's learned that God does his best work in the middle of our mess. Each episode, we have honest conversations with people who have walked through addiction, pain, or doubt, and with pastors, leaders, and everyday believers who are learning to live and lead authentically. So take a breath, pull up a chair, and let's get real. This is Unmasked. Today's guest on Unmasked is Daryl Dittmer, an author, entrepreneur, and a man whose life has been shaped by hard work, hard lessons, and honest self-examination. Raised in a blue-collar family where work ethic wasn't optional, Daryl learned early that nothing meaningful comes without effort. From farmhand to carpenter, business owner, builder, investor, consultant, and now author, his journey reflects a life lived through addiction, failure, growth, and reinvention. Daryl is the author of When I Stopped Fighting, The Unexpected Joy of Getting My Head Out of My Ass, a raw and disarming account of addiction, dysfunction, recovery, and freedom. His upcoming book, When You Stop Fighting, The Road You're On is Your Own Asphalt, invites readers to examine their trajectory, take ownership of their choices, and build a life marked by purpose, connection, and adventure. Grounded, reflective, and deeply honest, Daryl brings a voice that doesn't preach from theory, but speaks from experience, and today he's here with us to share his journey. Daryl, thanks for being with us here on Unmasked.
Wesley, thanks so much. I appreciate you inviting me on.
It's good to have you. Well, I am excited to hear your story. I know I've seen little bits of it in our back and forth conversation, and getting this scheduled. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Wesley. Sometimes it's hard to know where to start, but I think sort of the backdrop that I came from is a good place to just set the stage. And I was born in the Midwest. Actually, I was born in the city of Detroit, and that's why you see the little Lions thing behind me. Born in the city of Detroit. My dad was a mechanic. My mom took care of us kids. I had an older brother and a younger sister, which makes me the middle child. I still don't know exactly what that means, but I hear it means something. Who knows? Anyway, my dad was a pretty tough guy. He was a Korean War veteran, and just a very blue collar upbringing. Nobody in my family had graduated from college, and it was just hard work, and it was Protestant work ethic. That's how I grew up. And when I was a kid, I was probably, I don't know, 13 years old or so. I started, I guess I took my first drink, and what I remember is loving it. I loved it. I loved how it made me feel. And my parents were both pretty tough people, and I wouldn't say they were hard on us. At times they were, but it didn't come from a place that was they were trying to be damaging. It came from a place where they had their own things that they were dealing with, and it ended up being kind of tough on us. And that's fine. I it's been a long time since I've let go of blame or any sort of, pointing my finger back at my parents and saying, "Oh, it's your fault that this happened to me." So when I was 13, I started the drinking, and for whatever reason, I loved it, and I loved the escape, and I wanted to be in that place as often as I could. And that was a slippery slope for me, and it happened pretty quickly. I was probably 14, 15, started doing a lot of different drugs and smoking and, just a lot of things that I was taught not to do. And when I was a kid, I was handed a belief system, and they said, here, this is what you are supposed to believe and what you have to believe, or there are going to be consequences. And I kind of rebelled against that. I didn't feel like that resonated for me. So as I continued to do the drugs and the drinking and started, lying and cheating and stealing and petty crimes and just things that I was not brought up to do. And that ripped my guts out. That really, there was a friction inside of me that, part of me wanted to be this kid who was doing all the right things and getting good grades and playing sports and all that stuff, but all that stuff kind of went by the wayside, as I continued doing the drugs and alcohol. And the rub was that I had to hide. I had to keep me from being exposed or caught. And so it was just this inner conflict and this inner tension that just ripped me up inside, and I kept going further into the drugs and alcohol, where really at a point, and I don't know when that was, but that's all that mattered to me. All that mattered to me was getting the next drink or the next drug or whatever that was, and the drugs kept on getting harder and harder, and then I started dealing some drugs, and so it was a very slippery slope, and my insides were getting ripped out, my guts were getting stomped on because of how I was living. And 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 there was no governor for me to refer to, um to start doing the right things. So when I was 18 years old, and it was fairly quick, but my mom was, she was definitely after me, and I didn't necessarily think I was a kid at that time. I didn't think I was a scared kid at that time, but that's really all I was. I was just a scared kid. And I was confronted with an intervention. And basically it was, look, either go talk to this drug counselor or get out of our lives. And because it was too much for my parents at that point too, and had been for quite some time. So they said, if you're going to go to talk to this drug counselor, if that's what you decide to do, then meet us at such and such a place, such a time. And I said, okay. And I didn't know if I was going to go or not, honestly, because it was the meeting was probably a week or two hence. And finally I just said, something inside of me, and I don't know what it was. I don't know if I was just placating or, but something said, you got to go, just go. And whatever that happened to be. And so I went, and my immediate sort of, how I would deal with life and how I would deal with those in, positions over me, parents and adults and all that sort of thing, was I would just try to lie and get out of whatever it was that I was into. And I had that plan as I walked into this counselor's office, and he took one look at me and he said, don't even try to lie to me. Don't try to BS me. Don't try to do anything, because I'll kick you out and you'll be in a worse spot than you were before you came in. And so I was intimidated, and this dude who thought he was a tough guy, who really wasn't, was intimidated, and he scared me. And so I was able to tell him, um, the truth to the best of my ability at that time. And whatever that happened to be, but I that's what I tried to do. And at the end of it, I said, so what do you think, doc? I remember saying that. And he said, we need to get you into drug and alcohol treatment. So I went into treatment. It was a 30-day inpatient program. It was very difficult. People are counselors and therapists and all this stuff and all these things that I had never thought about in terms of dumping my guts out on the table about things that I had done and ways that I felt about things and about myself and all that sort of stuff. And I remember being in detox for, well, I don't really remember it. I remember one part of it, and this is an interesting part to me because it to me it illustrates where my soul was at that point. And so I remember laying on the bed face down, and this was the first, right when I got into treatment, the first couple of days they put you in detox, and I'm laying on the bed, and I'm not asleep, but I'm not awake, and I can feel my body being pulled down to the ground or to wherever I was being pulled downward, and it felt physical, like I was being pulled down, but it also felt like my soul was being pulled down. And that was a scary, scary place to be. I felt like I was like something evil was trying to take me. And so I'm getting pulled, and finally I just sort of snap out of it. I don't know if it was the fear, I don't know if I panicked, I don't know what it was, but and I came to some semblance of consciousness, and my body had been pulled off the bed and was down halfway on the floor, and my legs were up on the bed, and it was just the weirdest thing. And I remember sort of rolling back over onto my back and positioning myself again, and then I think I just went to sleep. But that was indicative of the struggle, and there was something evil trying to take me. And I don't know what that did for me or to me, but I know that I'll never forget that, and I'll never forget how that felt, and how frightening that was. And so that was treatment. Treatment was very eye-opening, but then I decided I had to get on with life, and I got involved in the 12 steps. That's, two things that treatment gave me. One was hope, and the other was the 12 steps. And the 12 steps was became my refuge because I was a scared kid, because I needed a direction, and because I was just a kid, I didn't know how to live, much less be sober and get it together. And they said, you're not going to stay sober, you're not going to stay in recovery if you don't change. And I'm like, all right, well, how do I change? And so the 12 steps was a roadmap to do that for me. Um, and I believe that, and we can talk further about this certainly, Wesley, but I believe that there is and was a plan for me to move out of this addicted dysfunction craziness and into a different way of life. And I call it God. I call it, I was helped, I was assisted, I was taught, I was put in different directions that ended up being good for me, and it wasn't me. And I do the work, but I'm not the one driving the bus, and that's at this point in my life, that's a pretty cool place to be. So I'll leave it there for now, Wesley. Thank you.
Yeah. One of the things that we say here on Unmasked is we give credit to God. for everything. And it's important that we live unmasked and we're able to talk about the things that we've gone through. And the fact that you've come on and being willing to talk about your addiction, which is something I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about, right? They're afraid to talk about the things that they've gone through, especially when it comes to addiction, because it's not an easy thing to talk about. And so I appreciate your being willing to come on and to explore that. So when you think about your faith specifically, I would love to kind of hear your faith journey through all of this. Were you brought up in the church, and how did your faith kind of ebb and flow, I guess you could say, through your addiction? And now that you're on the other side of it, how has it changed and grown since then?
I did grow up in the church. I grew up Lutheran and went to church every Sunday, and you know, we had our religion, our faith. I'll say our religion because at that point in my life, it was about the religion, and it was about some of the I felt, and this was for me at that time, that it didn't necessarily implant faith in me. They told me I had to have faith, but I didn't know what that was, because at that point in my life, I hadn't gone down a road of needing to find faith and engender faith within myself. And that took difficult experiences for me. That took difficult experiences for me to garner that faith. And so, I look at it like I've had two lives and probably 700, but I'll say two. Um, the two were prior to recovery, when I was given these things that I was told I had to believe, and then post recovery, which is where I saw it really working. I saw faith, that mustard seed start to sprout and start to grow. And I looked at life and I said, one of the things I had to do early on, and this was an important step for me. I had to look at what I had previously believed in the Lutheran faith, and I had to say, okay, what's working? What's working for me that they taught me that I was supposed to believe? And I had to take some of those aspects out of that and then leave some behind. And I had to lay my belief system out on a table. That's kind of how I envision. I had to lay it all out on the table and say, you know what? What's working, what's not, and what can I pick up and and move forward with, and what do I have to leave behind? And I did that. And part of my faith in very early on in recovery was as simple as, I don't make my eyes see, I don't make the grass grow, I don't make the planets move. God's here somewhere. And that was where it started. And it's grown over time where I have the sort of biblical upbringing, and I love the Bible, and I love all the wonder and the teachings in the Bible, but I apply them all to real life. And it's not something that's outside of me or up in the sky or somewhere removed from me. It is in me, and it is me, and it's everybody around me, and it's nature, and it's beauty, and it's also difficulty. It's also the things that help get me back on the track when I start to lose that faith, or I start to question, or I start to wonder. What the only thing that moves me back, and I can't speak for anybody else, but is difficulty, and is trials, and things that take a little more than maybe I have, and I have to rely on God, or for some people it's something larger than themselves. And I think God is to me, God becomes more and more undefinable because it's so big, I can't. God's so big, there's nothing I can do to understand. I just watch God work in my life, and that's a really cool thing because I see it every single day.
Both of your book titles, they both center around stopping the fight. And so when you were fighting for most of your life, or excuse me, what were you fighting for most of your life? And what finally made you realize that it wasn't working and that you had to stop fighting?
I love that because it goes back to a story. I had a mentor when I first got involved in the 12 steps. His name was Bud, and he really helped me understand the breadth and the depth of faith and of life, and just the wonderful journey that it can be, and expanded that for me, expanded it outside of what I had known to be true prior to that time. And so as I wrestled things, and I mentioned my dad was tough, my mom was pretty tough, they're the whole sort of battle cry at that point, coming up in my life was tough it out, no pain, no gain. Um, you're not hurt if there's not a bone sticking out, walk it off, all that sort of stuff, which I in some ways I agree with, because we can't let every little thing stop us. But in some ways, we have to do something other than fight. And Bud said to me, as he listened to me, talk about wrestling my problems and wrestling parents and fighting everything and everybody and that sort of thing, he said, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops. And that's why I titled my books with that title, When You Stop Fighting and When I Stop Fighting, because I was fighting everything, and I knew I needed to stop fighting everything. When he mentioned that to me, I'm like, oh, wow, that kind of makes sense. And I've been ruminating on it for 40 years now, and it makes more and more sense all the time. But ultimately what I was fighting, and this is probably the most important thing, is I was fighting me. It was under the guise of fighting all this other stuff, but ultimately I was fighting me. And that was the fight that needed to wane.
You talk a lot about responsibility and shame, and and so I'm curious, how do you help people take ownership of their lives without crushing themselves with guilt?
Well, responsibility is something I had to learn. And when I didn't get into treatment until I was just into my 19th year, or 19 years old. So I was, again, young, and I had no idea what the term responsibility even meant at that time in my life. And so I learned that over time, because I think a hard thing is, we all want maybe something different at any point in our lives, and we want it immediately because, why would we want to do all the work and take all the responsibility if we can just get it immediately? Well, that's not how life works. And so life works by me consistently taking responsibility for every aspect of my life. And when I say that, I mean body, mind, heart, and soul, and finances, because I think that's an important one to throw in there. But body, mind, heart, and soul are very important. So how am I treating my body? How am I treating my mind? How am I treating my heart? How am I treating my soul? And those are all my responsibility. So how do I stay away from guilt in terms of, the only place to feel guilty is in the past. And because that's the only thing there is to feel guilty about, is something behind me. And what I try to mentor people in is, look, we can look at the past, and we need to look at the past. And there are times when we need to make amends. And there are times when we need to, on a momentary basis, maybe say, I'm sorry, come to terms with our relationships and maybe the damage we've done, but also the damage we've done to ourselves. So those looks in the rearview mirror, I think, are very important, and reconciling our past is crucial, but not from a guilt perspective. It's from a calibration perspective, if I can put it that way, from a, like, where am I on the road perspective, as opposed to, oh man, I gotta, do what Martin Luther did and just flog myself because of my past. That's not what it's about. It's about understanding it. It's about making amends if we need to. It's about feeling it. And for me, there was a lot of crying. There was a lot of hurt. There was a lot of, I'm sorry. But it was so that I could get my face back in the windshield and move forward with my life in a responsible way, by learning from the things that I had done, as opposed to flogging myself for the things that I had done. Because beating ourselves up is useless. It serves no purpose. Recognizing, understanding, and moving forward in a different way is how our past serves us. And honestly, from a responsibility perspective, I also have a responsibility to myself, not to say that I'm not going to feel some guilt sometimes based on those things, but my responsibility to myself is that I can't, I'm being ineffective if I'm laying in the guilt and in the shame. And the way to move out of that is to take responsibility for everything.
Yeah, taking responsibility is not always the easiest thing to do. But, one of the things that I've realized in my own journey through recovery is that the addiction is often a symptom of something and not necessarily the root issue. And so when you think about it that way, what did sobriety reveal to you about yourself that you couldn't see beforehand?
Everything, everything. Um, Sobriety honestly showed me that the only way to move my life forward in the way that I want to move my life forward is to first and foremost get rid of the result of my deficiencies and insecurities and dysfunction, which is me doing drugs and drinking. So I have to get rid of that first, and then the only thing there is to do is change. Because if I don't change, I'm the same. I have the same issues and the same problems. I'm just not stuffing them down with drugs and alcohol. And so again, the responsibility is to change. And I liken it to a snake shedding its skin. I have to shed the old skin, and I have to allow that to fall off of me. And sometimes I have to help it fall off of me, by just making sure that it's going that way and going away from me, and so that I can grow that new skin. But that old skin is the way that I used to be. It's the not being honest with myself. It's the not being willing to change, or to do things differently, or to take responsibility. And that's all the old skin that I need to shed. Because if I don't shed that skin, I'm not going to move forward. And that's the hard truth that sometimes can be very hard to hear, but it is true. And we're never, I don't believe we're ever going, I don't think we're ever static. I think we're either going this way or we're going that way. And and sometimes we can just kind of bounce around. But if I want to straighten out my trajectory and start heading north, um, the drugs and alcohol are just the beginning, or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be drugs and alcohol. It can be food, it can be gambling, it can be a number of different. It can be Amazon, it can be social media, it can be tons of stuff. So I have to let go of the addiction. Then I'm allowed to change. Then I can change. But then I have to find out. I have to explore, what do I need to change about me. Um, and it narrows the focus, because the only thing I really need to change is me. I don't need to change the world. I just need to change me in the world, which is, not always the most fun part, but it is the most effective part.
Yeah, changing ourselves is never a fun part, but that's part of working the 12 steps is being willing to make those changes. I know if people out there are listening and they're probably familiar with the addiction story in some way, shape, or form, probably having gone through it themselves. But so I'm curious, what 12-step program were you a part of, or are you a part of?
I was in AA, and
Okay.
and I spent probably the first 8 to 10 years, being the first 8 very active, probably I probably averaged a meeting a day for those 8 years. And so that was how I came up, and I haven't been to a meeting in a long time, but um anyway, we can talk about that if you want to.
No, that's good. I talk a lot on here about celebrate recovery, but there are more than there is more than one type of recovery meeting. So the important part of it is whether you go to AA, NA, SA, CR, whatever it is that you take that first step and you find a meeting, and you start that road to recovery, and you won't just and don't look back. Keep your head down and work the program. They work. The second subtitle of your book says, "The road you're on is your own asphalt," which is very intriguing to me. And so I'm curious, what does that mean for somebody who feels stuck on the road that they didn't choose?
Well, I think to me, there's a difference between the road and the person on the road. And so uh, I chose, I guess is the best way to put it, the road that I was on, and that was on me. I decided to start drinking and doing drugs, and ultimately I decided to start lying and cheating and stealing and being a thief and all that sort of stuff. And so that's what I handed myself, and that's, the first thing I needed to overcome was Daryl. I needed to figure Daryl out and make Daryl different. So somebody who's struggling on the road with circumstances that, aren't necessarily of their choosing, the circumstances are something to be dealt with to the best of our ability, but more so than that is I have to deal with me to the best of my ability and help myself, because there's, tons of sayings about this sort of thing, but one of the ones that I really like, and I think it was an old Stoic thing or something, but the circumstances don't make the person, they reveal them to themselves. And so the circumstances I'm in show me things about me that maybe I can change, maybe I can do differently, maybe my behaviors are contributing to the circumstance that I'm in, or maybe, one thing that was hard for me is the people I had in my life. And when I got sober, they used to say, when you change the game, you got to change the players. And and so I had to jettison a lot of the people in my life. And over time, and I'm just being frank, I had to jettison some of my family members in terms of they were just toxic people in my life. And so not that I stop loving them, not that I stop wanting the best for them, but I can't have them poisoning the pool of my life. And sometimes that's a decision that we have to make for our own good. Um, to in order to show up the way that we want to for our lives, we can't let all the toxins overcome us. And and so sometimes the circumstances we think, oh, there's nothing I can do, but I can guarantee there's always something I can do about me. There's always something I can change about me, and that may make either the circumstances different or the circumstances much more palatable.
You know, entrepreneurship and recovery, they often share a lot of overlap. They both have risk, they both have humility, failure, persistence. They're a lot alike. And so when you think about it like that, how has sobriety changed the way that you build businesses and relationships?
You know, Coming from a very blue collar background, I remember when I was a kid, and speaking of church, my dad, I think I was 14 at the time, just getting started in my illustrious drinking and drugging career. My dad took me at 14 after church, and he put me in front of a farmer, and he said, "Can you put him to work?" And the farmer said, "Yeah, I can put him to work." And so I went to work working on farms, for much of the rest of my youth, and that was a great thing. But the reason I bring that up is because that taught me work ethic, and watching my dad also taught me work ethic. He was a mechanic. He worked a bunch of overtime. For General Motors, that's what you did back in the day in Michigan, and you worked for one of the big three. That's what most of my friends' dads did. And so I watched that, and I watched that work ethic, and I learned through, and a lot of this was through the 12 steps, um, in terms of how that relates to entrepreneurship. Because I had to be persistent to continue with the 12 steps. I had to be resolute in continuing with the 12 steps and doing all the difficult things that the 12 steps told me that I need to do. And and so I did those things, and it taught me that sometimes I just have to stick around. Sometimes I just have to not make that rash decision or that mistake or that thing that's going to put me in the wrong direction. And it's the exact same thing with entrepreneurships. It's the same thing with relationships. It's the same thing with everything that's in our lives. Once we get sober and we get in recovery, whatever recovery is for anyone, at that point, we are again responsible for the decisions we make, the choices we make, what we decide to do with our time, with our lives, all of it. And so I chose some hard things and some difficult, things in terms of having to make businesses work or turning them around, or whatever it was. Or sometimes I spent too much money, and I had to figure out, I had to go try to make more money because I didn't have enough to fund some of the things that I was doing. So, we make mistakes, and hopefully we learn. We go down maybe a wrong path for a little while, and hopefully we learn and turn it back around. And it's all the same. It's the same stuff in terms of what I need to get good at for pretty much every aspect of life, including business, including relationships and friends, and my, sort of inner workings, all of it. It's interesting how the same principles apply to all of it.
You mentioned briefly, you kind of mentioned emotional sobriety, um, which is not something I think that's talked about enough. And so I'm curious, what does emotional sobriety look like? Just be What does emotional sobriety look like beyond just not drinking and using?
Emotional sobriety to me is, and when I found my, I'll say it this way, when I was looking for a sponsor and I was probably, 8 months sober. I had had one sponsor before that, but I looked for a different sponsor at that point, and probably 8 months sober, and I wanted someone because I had 0 peace, 0 calm, 0 serenity, none of it. I didn't have any of it, and I looked for someone who had that. I looked in people's eyes, and I looked for somebody who had some sobriety under their belt, some time under their belt, and I found Bud, and he exemplified, um, to me, emotional sobriety, which is, enough peace of heart and peace of mind and calming the madness in here, and calming all the conversations and the people living rent free inside my head and all that stuff, and not getting overly wound up about things, and not getting, too down about things. I mean, there's a lot to it. And the more I can emotionally, understand that the storms are going to come, and I can either do this emotionally, or the storms can come and I can just kind of bump along, and have reasonable responses. And that's how I look at it today. Reasonable responses to the things that happen in and around me. And not to say that we don't make mistakes, that I don't make mistakes, that I don't, do things that aren't indicative of where I like to feel like I am in life at this time. But in general, and here's how I look at success. I'll just mention this because it ties into it. I used to look at success as making money. And for a long time now, I've looked at success as waking up in the morning with a smile on my face. And what does it take to wake up in the morning with a smile on my face? It takes emotional sobriety. It takes treating my body right, like we talked about earlier, treating my body right, treating my mind right, treating my heart right, treating my soul right. That's what emotional sobriety is to me now, and it's indispensable.
You said something there that I want to just touch base on. And that was, you mentioned community there for a second. You talked about the people in your lives. And one of the things that I talk about quite often is the importance of community, especially when you're going through things in your life and you're trying to make changes like you do when you're going through recovery. And so, talk to us a little bit about how community has played a role in your life, and helped you versus hurt you.
I had to have community when I first got involved in recovery, and it was absolutely indispensable. The 12 steps, the tables, the people that I met there, having that support, having that people to, that understood what it was all about, and how important it was to not only stay sober, but to, stop the BS from myself, and be honest with myself, and people who would advocate for me in that regard and help me and tell me the truth and all that sort of thing. So community is absolutely indispensable. And I think, or at least how it happened for me is, like I said, the first 8, 10 years, very active in AA, and then, it's sort of faded off after that. But one of the things that I have tried to do, up until today, and something I'm actually doing more formally going forward, is to mentor people, and to help people, and to give it away, because everything's a flow. And I truly believe this. It can't stop with me. When I and this is part of being in a community, and the community, my circle is smaller, but my community is bigger, because I'm not just trying to help people in recovery. I'm trying to help people with everything in their life. I'm trying to help people with with business and with relationships and with health and with, with all the things that help them be the most whole person that they can be. And so the community is large, but it's crucial that I give back to the community because the community gave so much to me. So it's indispensable, especially in the beginning, to be able to receive from the community and give what you can. But then as time goes on, you have to, I think it's our responsibility to give back to the community and take less, give more and take less, as we get our lives together and are able to move forward in a way that's self-sustainable.
Yeah, I would agree. It's important that you give back. One of the things you just mentioned too is actually goes right into my next question, and that is the importance of mentorship. Mentorship plays a very key role in journeys, especially when it deals with recovery. That's why they encourage a sponsor, as that's your mentor. And so, what makes, in your eyes, what makes a mentor truly helpful? And how do people know when they're ready to be mentored?
Um, Mentors is absolutely indispensable, and I think there is no bad time to have a mentor, but the best time is when you're ready to change and you're willing to change and you want to change and you just don't know what the path looks like, or it might be in front of you, but it's intimidating and it's scary. That's what the 12 steps were to me in the very beginning, just really frightening to think about moving down that road. So a mentor helps to ease that transition and ease that transformation so that it's understandable. And there are people who've been doing things for 10 minutes and think they should be teaching everybody else how to do it. But it takes introspection, it takes time, it takes experience, it takes going through things, but not just going through them, learning from them and going beyond those hurdles and those obstacles, to where I can reach back and help pull somebody over and help them move through those obstacles in a way that makes sense for them. And that takes time and that takes experience. So I am a huge fan of mentors, and I have had mentors, all the way up in my life, and have found different mentors, whether it's teaching me um, things to help my physical body or my emotional body or whatever it is, or my soul. Um, there's always somebody I can learn from. But in terms of giving advice to folks who might be younger in recovery, sobriety, whatever it is, I would say find someone not your age. If you can find someone a little older and a little more experienced who's been doing it for a while, and look for someone who has the qualities that you would like to emulate. Because if they have those qualities and they're teaching you, that's probably the direction that you're going.
Agreed. Daryl, I have one last question for you, but before I ask that, I want to give you the opportunity here to be able to share with the listeners how they can find you online and how they can find both of your books and what the titles were one more time.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Wesley. So the titles are When I Stop Fighting, and that's my first book. My second book is When You Stop Fighting. And actually, there's one over my shoulder right there. That's the When You Stop Fighting. That's a white cover. You can find them on Amazon. Just plug in either When I Stop Fighting or When You Stop Fighting, or you can plug in my name, which is Daryl Dittmer. And my website is also daryldittmer.com, which is DARYLDITTMER. And so you can plug that into Amazon or plug that into, my website, and that'll take you to everything you want to know about me. I am moving into, coaching and mentoring on a more formal basis, and I'm very excited about that because I feel like I'm going to be able to reach more people, and help them with more things. I love to keep going. I love to keep moving. I love to keep changing and learning and all that sort of thing. So I'm learning a little more formal ways in terms of helping mentor and coach people, and I'm excited about it. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Well, I'll leave a link to your website down in the show notes for anybody that's interested, excuse me, and you can find out more about Daryl and his books and stuff on his website. Daryl, one of the things that I love to do on this show is I love to leave my listeners with something to think through, an action step, if you will, to be able to allow them to continue their journey as they work to live unmasked. And so, for somebody that's out there listening who feels exhausted from trying to control everything, what is one practical step that they can take this week to stop fighting and start living intentionally?
I'll tell a little story if that's okay, Wesley, in terms of
Sure.
my belief systems surrounding that, and one of the best stories that I have ever been involved in my life and helped change me. And there's I like to think there's five things or so that just sort of stick in our minds and in our hearts and in our souls, and this is one of those things for me. So there was a Friday night meeting. It was at a community center in a nearby city to where I lived, just getting sober, and it was a pretty big meeting, pretty big community center. The meeting, I don't know, it was maybe a couple hundred people, it's good size. And so I'd go to that meeting with these young guys that I was hanging out with at that time, and some were serious about recovery, some weren't as serious. I was very serious about it. I wanted to change. I wanted my life to change. And there was this older gentleman there, and his name was Jimmy. And he was kind of a slight, smaller guy. And he was a little older, and he'd walk around a little hunched over. And Jimmy at that time was 40 years in recovery. And we used to look at Jimmy like, man, Jimmy's a deity. You know what I mean? Just because we're like 6 months, 9 months sober, whatever. And Jimmy was this guy, and we're like, man, 40 years, what's going on? And I would watch Jimmy, and I was always very interested in him because of that long-term recovery that he had, and and he was the only person in any meeting that I ever went to who would go and fill the coffee carafe and go around and fill people's coffee cups. And I'm like, man, that's a really selfless, cool, service oriented thing to do. And I watched him do that. And then I would listen to him speak. And one of the things he used to say, and this is the biggest point of this story, is Jimmy would say, if you want to stay in recovery and stay sober and have a great life, you have to learn how to stay small. And I thought about that, and I'm like, I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about, but then it struck me at some point, and I've been ruminating on it ever since. He meant I need to remain humble if I want to move forward in this life. And I don't mean humble like humiliation. I mean humble like teachable. I need to be open to learning. I need to be open to learning a different way to live and listen to people who have been doing it longer than me, and do my best to understand as opposed to always trying to be understood. And that took a lot of heat off of me. It took a lot of heat off of me when all I had to do was think about, I didn't have to think about, you talked about control, changing the world. And I gotta, I gotta do this and I gotta do that. Listen, just what I needed to do at that time in my life was listen to people who knew more than me and pay attention to what they say and try to do some of the things that they wanted me to do so that I could gain that self-confidence, and I could show up for myself and I could show up for my life. And doing that from a humble perspective doesn't mean not doing the work. It means absolutely doing the work, but I don't have to be in charge of everything. I don't have to be the one moving all the pieces. I can be riding on the bus while still doing the work. So that's the advice I would give is be teachable, stay humble, you know, get your feet under you, get your legs under you, get your balance, and as you change, life will change for the better.
Well, there you have it. Thanks, Daryl, for being with us today on Unmasked and sharing your story and just trusting us with it.
Thank you, Wesley. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Our pleasure. Well, thanks for joining me today on Unmasked, and a huge thanks to my guest again. Thanks, Daryl, for coming on and sharing so openly and honestly with us. If something in this episode spoke to you, don't let it stop with you. Share it with the one person that God spoke to you. Share it with the one person that God put on your heart while you were listening, because you never know whose breakthrough might start with just that simple message. If you want more encouragement, you want to work with me one-on-one, or you're interested in having me speak at your church or event, you can find everything that you need to know at wesleyfarnsworth.com. And make sure you join the Unmasked community by following me on social media so that we can keep walking this journey together. Until next time, remember that grace is greater than your past, and freedom begins the moment that we choose to live unmasked. God bless you.